It was a crisp autumn evening in late October 2019 when Keanu Reeves walked into the lobby of a luxurious boutique hotel in Los Angeles dressed in his usual unassuming attire, a black blazer and jeans. He looked like just another weary traveler. Little did anyone in the lobby know that this man wasn't just a guest but the secret owner of the entire establishment. The hotel had been a personal project of Keanu's, a sanctuary where he wanted people to experience warmth and hospitality. But that evening, he was met with anything but kindness. "Excuse me, sir," snobbed the receptionist, a sharp-looking woman in her early 30s named Amanda. "Do you even have a reservation? We don't just let anyone walk in here." "You know," Keanu raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor masking his surprise. "Actually, I do," he replied, softly reaching into his pocket for the confirmation email. Amanda rolled her eyes, muttering, "Just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. People like you think you can just stroll into places like this. This is not a hostel." A few guests glanced over, sensing the tension. Keanu remained composed, though a flicker of hurt crossed his face. He handed over his phone. The email pulled up, but Amanda barely glanced at it before continuing her tirade. "This isn't the type of place you can book on a whim," she said coldly. "We cater to an elite clientele, celebrities, CEOs, people who can actually afford it. I suggest you try somewhere else." Across the lobby, a young couple was sitting by the fireplace. Emily and David, high school sweethearts in their late 20s, had been enjoying a quiet anniversary getaway. They couldn't help but overhear the exchange and felt their hearts sink. Emily nudged David, whispering, "Isn't that Keanu Reeves? He looks just like him." David squinted. "It can't be. What would he be doing here?" Meanwhile, Amanda continued to berate Keanu, oblivious to the growing discomfort of the guest around her. "Listen," she said with a condescending sigh, "we have an image to maintain. If you can't afford this place, there's a motel down the street." Keanu finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "Is this how you treat all your guests?" Amanda smirked. "Only the ones who don't belong." Just as she reached for the phone to call security, a voice interrupted her. Amanda said James, the hotel manager, who had just walked into the lobby. His face went pale as he spotted Keanu. "What are you doing?" Amanda turned confused. "I'm handling a situation," she replied, gesturing dismissively toward Keanu. James hurried over, his expression a mix of panic and disbelief. "That's not just a guest," he said, his voice trembling. "That's Mr. Reeves. He owns this hotel." The room fell silent, Amanda's face drained of color as she processed James's words. Keanu, however, remained calm. He didn't need to say anything. The weight of the truth spoke for itself. Emily and David exchanged stunned glances, their romantic evening suddenly infused with an unforgettable story to tell. Emily whispered, "I knew it was him," as Amanda stammered an apology. Keanu did something no one expected. James, the manager, nervously stepped aside, sensing that Keanu's next move would determine the outcome of this awkward and painful moment. Amanda stood frozen, her confidence shattered as guilt and fear swirled in her eyes. The guests in the lobby were silent, their curiosity and disbelief palpable. Keanu exhaled deeply, his calm demeanor masking the emotional weight of the moment. Looking Amanda directly in the eyes, he said quietly, "I believe in kindness. It's the foundation of everything we built here. Everyone deserves respect, no matter where they come from or how they look." Amanda's lips trembled as tears began to well up in her eyes. She suddenly realized how deeply she had misjudged him, not just as a guest, but as a human being. "Mr. Reeves, I'm so sorry," she choked out, her voice cracking. Keanu didn't reply immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, meeting the gazes of the guests who had witnessed the incident. He saw Emily and David sitting by the fireplace, their expressions filled with admiration and hope. For a brief moment, his eyes softened. "I wasn't always someone who could afford a place like this," Keanu finally said, his voice filled with raw emotion. "There was a time when I didn't know where my next meal was coming from, let alone where I'd sleep. That's why I wanted this hotel to be different, a place where people feel welcome no matter what." Emily and David exchanged glances, their hearts aching for him. They had read stories about Keanu's struggles, the loss of his girlfriend Jennifer Sim, and their unborn child years ago, the death of his best friend River Phoenix, his sister's battle with leukemia. But hearing him speak with such vulnerability was something else entirely. Amanda broke down, her tears flowing freely. "Now, I don't know what came over me. I let my pride and prejudice cloud my judgment," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please forgive me." Keanu nodded but didn't immediately offer forgiveness. Instead, he said, "Words are easy, actions matter more. How you treat people when no one's watching is what defines you." At that moment, James stepped forward, his expression a mixture of shame and determination. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "I take full responsibility for what happened here tonight. This isn't what we stand for. I promise you changes will be made." Keanu gave him a small nod, but his focus remained on Amanda. "The world needs more kindness," he said softly, "and it starts with us." Emily couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She leaned into David, whispering, "It's incredible how someone who's been through so much pain can still choose to be kind." As Keanu prepared to leave the lobby, a young boy, holding his mother's hand, approached him hesitantly. The boy, no older than 8, had been sitting quietly with his family in the corner of the room watching everything unfold. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice trembling. Keanu knelt down to meet the boy's gaze. "Hey, there, buddy," he said gently. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "My dad used to watch your movies with me before he went to heaven. He said he always said you were the nicest person in Hollywood. I think he was right." Tears filled Keanu's eyes as he carefully unfolded the paper. It was a simple drawing of a superhero with a boy's handwriting at the top. "To Mr. Reeves, the real superhero." The lobby fell silent again, this time not out of shock, but out of awe. Keanu, visibly moved, pulled the boy into a gentle hug. "Your dad must have been an amazing person," he said softly. "Thank you for sharing this with me. It means more than you know." Emily and David wiped their tears, their anniversary now etched with a story they'd never forget, a story of humility, forgiveness, and the enduring power of kindness. And as Keanu stood to leave, he turned back to the guest, his voice calm but resolute. "This place isn't about luxury or status. It's about people. Let's never forget that." Keanu gently patted the boy's shoulder before rising to his feet, the drawing still clutched in his hand. He glanced at the boy's mother, who had tears streaming down her face. She mouthed, "Thank you," overwhelmed by the simple but profound moment her son had just experienced. Amanda, still trembling from the weight of her actions, watched as Keanu interacted with the boy. Something deep inside her shifted. Her tears weren't just from shame, they were from an ache she hadn't acknowledged in years. Amanda had spent so much of her life trying to prove she belonged in elite circles that she'd forgotten what it meant to connect with people. Keanu's words echoed in her mind. "How you treat people when no one's watching is what defines you." The young boy and his mother began to walk away, but Keanu called after them. "Wait," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small keychain, a token from one of his movie sets. It was old and scratched, but still gleamed faintly under the lobby's warm lights. "Your dad must have been a great man," Keanu said, kneeling back down to the boy's level. "I want you to have this. It's from a movie I made long time ago. It's not much, but maybe it'll remind you that heroes come in all shapes and sizes." The boy's eyes widened as he accepted the gift, his small hands trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Keanu smiled faintly, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. As the boy turned to leave, Keanu stood, his gaze following the child and his mother until they disappeared through the revolving doors. Emily, still watching from the corner with David, leaned closer and whispered, "He's carrying so much, you can see it in his eyes." David nodded. "But look at how he uses it. He turns his pain into something beautiful." Keanu returned to the front desk where Amanda still stood, her hands wringing nervously. She opened her mouth to apologize again, but Keanu held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not interested in apologies," he said gently. "I'm interested in change." Amanda nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'll do better. I swear I will." Keanu gave her a small nod, his expression softening. "We all make mistakes. It's what we do next that matters." Suddenly, from the far corner of the room, a soft piano melody began to play. An older man in his 70s, who had been sitting quietly at the hotel bar, had wandered over to the grand piano. His fingers moved across the keys with surprising agility, filling the room with a hauntingly beautiful rendition of Claire de Lune. Keanu turned toward the music, his face lighting up with recognition. The man whose name tag identified him as George Maintenance was completely absorbed in the music, oblivious to the impact he was having. Keanu approached the piano, a wistful smile on his face. When George finished the piece, Keanu clapped softly, causing the older man to look up startled. "That was incredible," Keanu said, his voice warm. "How long have you been playing?" George chuckled, scratching the back of his head. "Longer than I've been fixing pipes, that's for sure. My wife used to love this piece, played it every night for her before she passed." Keanu's expression softened even further. "She must have been lucky to have someone who loved her like that." George smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "I was the lucky one." The room fell into a contemplative silence, the weight of the moment sinking into everyone's hearts. Keanu placed a hand on George's shoulder. "Thank you for sharing that with us," he said quietly. George nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves, not just for listening, but for being someone who sees people." Kate stepped back, his mind replaying George's words. He glanced around the lobby at Amanda, Emily, and David, the boy and his mother, just outside the glass doors, and George by the piano. For a moment, the weight of everything, the loss, the pain, the love, the hope, felt almost unbearable. Yet somehow amidst it all there was a profound beauty. He turned back to the guests and staff, his voice steady but filled with unshakable resolve. "The hardest thing about being human is carrying the weight of everything you've lost," he said, "but it's also what makes love so powerful. It's what keeps us going." Emily, now openly crying, reached for David's hand, their anniversary taking on a deeper meaning across the room. Amanda wiped her eyes, silently promising herself that she would never let another person feel unseen, and Keanu, still holding the boys drawing in his hand, walked toward the elevators. His steps were quiet, his presence unassuming, but he left behind a room full of people forever changed by the man they'd underestimated. As the elevator doors closed behind Keanu, the lobby remained silent, the weight of the moment lingering like an invisible thread connecting everyone who had witnessed it. Amanda sank into the nearest chair, her face buried in her hands. She had never felt so small, so exposed, yet at the same time something within her stirred a deep aching need to be better, to rediscover the kindness she had lost somewhere along the way. Emily and David sat quietly by the fireplace, holding hands, their hearts full but heavy. "Do you think people ever realize how much pain he carries?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. David shook his head. "Probably not. People see the actor, the celebrity. They don't see the man who's had to rebuild himself from ashes over and over again." Upstairs, Keanu walked into his private suite. It was beautifully furnished, every detail carefully curated to reflect warmth and elegance, but the space felt cold to him. He placed the boy's drawing on the desk by the window and stared at it for a long moment. The child's words echoed in his mind. "My dad said you were the nicest person in Hollywood." Keanu sat down slowly, his hands trembling as they hovered over the paper. His thoughts drifted to his own father, a man who had left when Keanu was just a boy. He had spent years trying to fill that void, but no matter how much he achieved or how far he traveled, the emptiness lingered. Then there was Jennifer, his soulmate, the one who should have been sitting beside him now, laughing about the absurdity of life and sharing stories of the people they met. Her absence was a wound that never fully healed, and yet he carried her memory with him in everything he did, striving to honor the love they had shared. A knock on the door startled him. "Come in," he called, his voice hoarse. James, the manager, stepped inside, his face etched with worry. "Mr. Reeves, I just wanted to check on you. I know tonight was a lot." Keanu gave him a small smile. "It's fine, James, I'm fine." But James wasn't convinced. He hesitated before speaking again. "You know, when we started this hotel, you told me something that stuck with me ever since. You said people don't come to places like this for the rooms or the amenities. They come because they're looking for connection, for a moment that reminds them why life is worth living." Keanu nodded, his gaze distant. James continued, his voice soft. "I think tonight you gave everyone in that lobby a moment like that, even Amanda, especially Amanda." Keanu chuckled faintly, though his eyes glistened. "Let's hope she takes it to heart." James stepped closer, his expression earnest. "You're more than just the owner of this place, Keanu. You're the heart of it. And whether you realize it or not, you're giving people something can carry with them long after they leave here." Keanu looked at James, his throat tight with unspoken emotion. "Sometimes I wonder if I have anything left to give," he admitted quietly. James shook his head. "You have more to give than most people ever will, and it's because you understand loss. You've lived through it, and you've turned it into something that heals others." Keanu didn't respond, but silence spoke volumes. Later that night, as the hotel quieted down and the city lights glittered outside his window, Keanu sat by the desk, the boy's drawing still in front of him. He picked up a pen and on the back of the paper wrote a simple note to the boy, who reminded me that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. "Thank you for being mine tonight, Keanu." He folded the paper carefully and placed it in an envelope. The next morning, he handed it to the front desk, asking that it be delivered to the boys' room before they checked out. Downstairs, Amanda arrived early, her eyes red from a night of restless reflection. She found James waiting for her with a steaming cup of coffee. "You're here early," he said, handing her the cup. She nodded, her voice shaky. "I want to start over. I need to." James studied her for a moment before giving her an encouraged nod. "Then let's make today count." As Amanda took her place behind the desk, the lobby began to fill with a morning rush. Guests came and went, some rushing to meetings, others lingering over coffee and pastries, and in the midst of it all, Amanda spotted the young boy and his mother heading toward the door. As the boy clutched the envelope in his hands, his face glowing with joy, he stopped abruptly and turned back, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Amanda. He waved at her, a small but sincere gesture of forgiveness and connection. Amanda felt a lump rise in her throat as she waved back, a tear slipping down her cheek. In that moment, she understood that it wasn't just Keanu who had given the boy a gift, it was the boy who had given all of them a chance to be better. And somewhere upstairs, Keanu sat by the window watching the city come alive, the boy's words and drawing etched forever in his heart. The boy and his mother walked out of the hotel, the morning sun casting a golden glow over the city. As they crossed the street, the boy clutched the envelope like a treasure, smiling up at his mother. "I told you, Mom," he said, his voice filled with awe. "He's a real superhero." Inside the hotel, Amanda wiped her tears discreetly and returned to her duties. She had a quiet resolve now, a determination to embody the kindness Keanu had shown, even when she didn't deserve it. James noticed her transformation, the subtle warmth in her tone as she greeted guests, and he knew Keanu's words had taken root. Upstairs, Keanu stood by the window, the city sprawling before him. He watched the boy and his mother until they disappeared into the crowd. His chest felt heavy, but for the first time in weeks, there was a small flicker of peace. He thought about the boys drawing the words scrolled in shaky handwriting, "To Mr. Reeves, the real superhero." It wasn't the first time someone had called him a hero. Fans often said it, inspired by his movies or the quiet stories of his generosity, but hearing it from a child, a boy who had lost his father, hit differently. It reminded him of his own pain of the moments when he had needed someone to believe in and how much it had hurt. When there was no one there. Keanu exhaled deeply, the weight of the past pressing against him like an old wound. He thought of Jennifer, her laughter, her dreams, the life they were supposed to have together. He thought of his sister, who had fought so hard against leukemia, and how helpless he'd felt watching her suffer. And yet, despite the losses here, he was still standing, still trying. He walked over to the small safe in the corner of the room and opened it. Inside was a collection of mementos, a photograph of Jennifer, a bracelet. His sister had given him a worn copy of a book his late friend River Phoenix had loved. He added the boy's drawing to the collection, tucking it carefully between the pages of the book. As he closed the safe, his phone buzzed. It was a message from James. "Thank you for last night. You reminded all of us why we're here. Amanda wanted me to tell you. She's ready to change. I think we all are." Keanu smiled faintly, replying with a simple kindness as a ripple. "Let's keep it going." Later that day, as Keanu prepared to leave the hotel, he made one last stop in the lobby. The staff gathered around him, their expression a mix of gratitude and admiration. Amanda stepped forward, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Mr. Gaves," she began, her voice shaky but sincere, "I just want to say thank you, not just for last night, but for giving me a second chance. I promise I'll make the most of it." Keanu nodded, his gaze steady. "It's not about being perfect, it's about being better than we were yesterday. Keep trying." As he stepped outside, the crisp autumn air greeted him. The streets bustled with life, and for a moment, Ku, who felt like just another face in the crowd, a feeling he cherished. He pulled out his phone and opened the note app, typing a few words before slipping it back into his pocket. Sometimes the smallest moments remind us of the biggest truths. Kindness matters, love heals, and even in the darkest times, we can be someone's light. As he walked away, blending into the city, the boy's drawing and words stayed with him, a reminder that heroes weren't just on screen, they were in the quiet acts of love and kindness that connected one soul to another. And maybe, just maybe, in the face of so much loss, Keanu realized he hadn't lost the ability to keep giving, to keep loving. Sometimes that was enough.